Okay, we'll get this show on the road. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here. We're back to our weekly Thursday 11 a.m. slots, and we're in the middle of our Standards and Guidelines Digital Ad Ops series, which we'd normally be holding physically together in Sydney. I think at the moment is where we would be, but here we are virtually still carrying on. I think we've done almost 30 webinars now. So I'm excited to touch upon the topic of auction mechanics, as we have a handbook forthcoming that's coming out from the council that everyone's working on now. It'll be published before Christmas. So we wanted to come back to the topic and see what some of the latest trends are in and around all things programmatic, but particularly around the aspect of auction mechanics. And as a part of that, we also wanted to provide a bit of an introduction to Prebid, which is something that we touched on before, but we're going to dive into it a bit more in the handbook this time round, which is the version 3 that we updated from the version 2 that we pushed out in February 2019. So to assist us today, I have a plethora of very glamorous industry experts for you, and it's fantastic to get a representative group like this together. And we'll be hearing from them all later on in a panel. And Mitch Greenway from OpenX will also be providing us a bit of an introduction to Prebid, which it remains, and I think it is certainly the most popular free and open source header bidding wrapper that's been adopted and utilized since 2015, when AppNexus effectively donated the core code for it as an open source solution for publishers to utilize. AppNexus, now Xander, of course. And Rubicon, now Magnite, very quickly got on board. And that sort of collaborative approach to a free solution for header bidding for the industry was soon born. And it's been evolving ever since. Certainly in terms of the Open RTB protocols with Tech Lab supporting those, that's something they work together with the Prebid organization and the structure of companies led by these member businesses, all of whom I think you recognize, and certainly 3 of whom are with us here today. You'll find more in the handbook about it. I mean, it's one of those solutions that is very well known, but I think we probably haven't covered enough necessarily at the IAB. So we're going to include it and keep any updates that come out. We can keep the industry up to date with any of the advances that we're seeing in Prebid as well that are useful for anyone. So to help us in terms of an introduction and a bit of an overview in terms of the product suites, the benefits of and other aspects of Prebid, I'll invite Mitch, please, to give us a bit of an intro. So if you just simply you can just start sharing your slides, Mitch, and that'll kick me off.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Jonas. I think probably to echo, what you said, I'm pretty excited to be involved just today I'm going to give just a bit of a top level view of kind of the proliferation and adoption of Prebid, and then I'll talk a little bit more specifically around the types of integrations with Prebid. Some new updates. We've also had some recent updates with Prebid 4.0, which is pretty exciting. I can talk about that. And then probably want to pass on and just give you guys a bit of a case study on that, because I know certainly header bidding as a technology is something that's not new, but Prebid, in terms of having its time in the sun, I think more and more publishers are really looking to it. As Jonas mentioned, it's open source and it's freely available and widely supported by many of the majors and minors, as you saw that. So to kind of get us started, I wanted to talk about header bidding evolution really quickly to give everyone a bit of a refresher. Certainly in the Australian New Zealand market ourselves, we are all a primarily Google-centric market by default, and the adoption of their technology and ad stacks. One thing that you would see probably around prior to Prebid launching in 2015 was the traditional waterfall, and we all any publisher would have had it. They would have had the premium sold inventory fall down into standard. That then would call through potentially to some PMPs that they had set up through Google. And then a final call which may send out to AdX and then an unfilled or house ads that would really take up the bulk of the remaining inventory. Prebid launched itself really as a header bidding in a way in which publishers could adopt and implement, either via server to server or via tag on page, and manage multiple demand sources across in the same priority that you would essentially be able to set as AdX and the rest of your stack. So it was a really great way, A, to increase the amount of demand that publishers could have on the stack, and B, not only that, is squeeze the rest of their yield across their entire inventory source, which was really great. Around about 2016, that caused a lot of pressure, and we all know EBDA exchange bidding was kind of formed around the start of 2016. Some markets didn't get it till later, but the Australian market had it early 2016, and that was Google's answer to essentially header bidding and enabling exchanges, large exchanges that would hold prior mini auctions and be able to bid into AdX, which would help, of course, publishers with their yield. EBDA is a premium or GAM 360 now in terms of a feature set, so it was really only available to the large-scale publishers or mid-scale publishers that had access to that. That then caused a lot of publishers to be able to look at their stack and say, great, we have EBDA turned on, but what are ways in which we can kind of increase this? And around about 2017, that's where you saw the adoption of Prebid and or managed services really take lead way across our industry, and move further on into really the proliferation of header bidding, where not only were publishers now looking at yield and optimization, they were adding more and more demand partners to increase that competition. And finally, this all really pushed and was supported by transparency measures and publishers really wanting a lot more transparency, a lot more free to roam, and a lot more ownership of their own ad stack. Prebid itself really great. I will talk particularly just about Prebid.js, which is the tag implementation or client-side implementation that you would hear of. It provides a simple and easy way to implement code set and improve across a publisher's bidding inventory. Jonas hit the nail on the head. It is widely supported. So we saw some of the majors there on that first slide, but in essence, it's actually supported by over 150 demand sources globally and 15 analytic adapters. Now, depending on the market you're in, whether you're in ANZ or you're Southeast Asia, or if you're in the US or EMEA, those demand sources are going to be stronger or weaker depending on, of course, the exchange and the demand sources in that region. So Prebid itself being so supported by so many demand sources is really great, regardless of where your inventory is coming from. The other key thing to look at is the analytic adapters, which is, it's one of those things that if you love insights and you love analytics and making decisions based on the back of data, analytic adapters are really great things to be able to plug into a Prebid. And many of the majors provide their own analytic adapters, and there are some other companies out there as well that you can subscribe to for their analytic adapters. So that's something to keep in mind as well. It is open source technology, and it's empowered through an entire collaboration of ad tech. And I think that's really, the constant evolving needs of our industry and the capabilities that we need to improve header bidding. Certainly, individual companies are off doing very different things and kind of improving on their own products. But this open source, supportive, collaborative environment for Prebid is really a great thing to see, and it continues to do so well. And again, kind of touching on that point, it's an active community of supporters. Again, 4.0 was just released in September, which is some really exciting updates there. And there's a huge knowledge base. So I think if any publisher is trying to think about, okay, can I do this myself? Where do I even start? There's a massive knowledge base in Prebid.org. On the Prebid products themselves, I'll quickly go over these again, because these are going to change depending on the type of integration you need as a publisher, or essentially you want to deploy across your business. Prebid.js is a client-side integration, and I will talk about client-side and server-side in a second, just really briefly on that. But the auction mechanics handbook does a great explanation of the benefits for that as a business, and we're going to update that as well, which we're excited about. But the leading web-based header bidding solution, it's used by publishers worldwide, it's open source, and it's a really, truly transparent way for a publisher to deploy a wrapper across their business and own that. Prebid Mobile, there is an actual SDK available. So there are mobile-based apps that, they're looking for a way in which they can move into and deploy Prebid. That is available for them. It enables apps, again, to move beyond just the traditional waterfall. That is a newer product, so certainly the adoption is not as far spread as you would look at with something like a client-side integration with Prebid.js. And then finally, Prebid Server. So shifting Prebid to the cloud for improved efficiency, scale, and performance. And And I did mention I'd give you guys a little bit of a pros and cons list for both. Really, when you look at a client-side integration, you're looking at tags on page. Certainly for the audience here today, I don't want to teach anyone to suck eggs because you're certainly more advanced, I'm sure, across this. But having tag on page, what that does is it causes a bit of a latency, certainly with the ad call takes place and goes out to those multiple demand partners. There is browsing limitations as well, which depending on the volume of ad requests that can happen thereafter. The good thing though, and the pro with the client-side integration and tags on page, is there's a high cookie match rate, which is really good. And there's also transparent options that, in terms of when an open source tech is used, you really can see the ins and outs of all of the bid mechanics that are taking place. Prebid server, pros and cons. Certainly when you're moving everything to the server, there's a lot less latency and there's quicker response times. Now, one of the other major benefits, certainly from an exchange, when we work with server integrations, is there's a lot less processing power required to the end user, which for anyone that's involved in UX on this webinar, UX certainly when you're talking about ad load times and transition across your publishers' pages and inventory, server to server is a really good way to limit that, increase the speed. And of course, the other really good thing is with server is the ability to have multiple demand sources and increase and scale those demand sources. Con is there's a low cookie match rate. So you really need to add up in your business is audience and is data-led audience targeting across your business worth a lot to you? Or are you a large business that potentially is working on scale and that's potentially your way forward? So there's just some pros and cons to think of with those. As always, certainly, speak to anyone out there in terms of consultants or exchanges that can give you advice on what would be the right fit for you. Moving more closely, in September, Prebid had a recent launch of 4.0, and there's a couple of housekeeping updates to 4.0, but the major was actually the inclusion of critical updates related to the TCF 2.0. Now, TCF is the Transparency and Consent Framework built out of Europe and the IAB Europe and IAB Tech Labs. And really, this is just hugely to support the ongoing efforts around consent and publishers' ability to conform and actually restrict interest-based targeted ads. So that's been something that's been really important in the 4.0. There's also been some quality of life improvements around standardization. When you look at ad tech everywhere, lots of vendors have different types of integrations, different types of parameters. So one thing that there was a major shift towards a standardization on parameter locations, video parameters, and a meta taxonomy that's been standardized, which is really great. And then again, just to kind of tap off on certainly the Prebid and the flexible software solutions, it's helping publishers to be able to conform to this transparent and consent framework. That's going to be really, really important. I think the purpose of this is to set publishers up to be able to enact or restrict those target parameters as consent and privacy concerns continue to evolve, because it's something that some markets are more strict than others. And I think that having at least an underlevel and undergrounding of tech across the business that can do that is really great. I wanted to leave everyone, certainly I've got a quick intro and to give you a quick overview, but OpenX, we were lucky to work with Compass Media, which is one of Indonesia's largest news publishers. And I wanted to talk about this particularly because it shows the benefits of using open source when combining it with a Google-centric stack. And I think that's really important to remember because we are so Google focused in this market particularly. The huge thing is they actually really wanted, in the story of these guys, they had a managed solution, but they wanted to bring it all back in-house for transparency reasons, also for other reasons around wanting to own their own destiny and build up their own ad stack that they could manage whenever they needed to. So that was one of the key drivers in their transition period. They reached out to us and we consulted them along this process to really deploy Prebid.js. And the numbers speak for themselves. Certainly this is respective of their market and their inventory, but certainly out of all the integrations I've seen in my time at OpenX, the ones that really power up their open bidding or their Google-centric stack with a client-side or server-side integration of Prebid, they have been the ones that I've seen the greatest increase across programmatic revenue and increases in CPM. So, just wanted to show certainly the power of Prebid. It is all there. There is huge resource bank. And give you a quick little overview certainly of the product up to date. Jonas, over to you. Again, any questions, I'm more than happy, offline, if anyone has specific ones about Prebid, I'm more than happy to. But stay tuned for the auction mechanics book. That's really going to have a good position on it.
Wonderfully done, Mitch. Thank you so much. And just before we go into the panel, actually, just a couple of questions for you, because I mean, for publishers that are considering this as an option, I guess first of all they've got to ascertain, have they got the right skill sets in terms of the resources and people to take on a solution like this, and also, do you have any sort of first steps or considerations for them in terms of adoption?
Yeah, it's my time at publishers has been, I've loved it. I've spent a lot of my career publisher side. The thing with publishers is they're doing so much across the business that when it comes to the ad tech and certainly the product people or the engineers that publishers do have in-house, they're not necessarily ad tech focused in terms of their experience and their knowledge base. So I would say if you're looking around deploying Prebid yourself, because it is open source, you can completely go out there and do it yourself. It does help to have a vendor or a consultant that can walk you through the steps. Now that doesn't necessarily mean, of course, you are using them for everything, but it does help if you're leaning on them if they do this day to day. The other thing to really consider is what is the right implementation for you, for your market. And I know we are talking to ANZ publishers particularly. There are some other markets that have joined us, but really look at what would power up your business. I've talked about this before in the past too, and I think managed wrappers are a really, really great thing if they serve a purpose for your business. And if you're a publisher and you simply do not have the resources and cannot do it yourself, I really do think that managed services are a great solution. If you do have those resources internally and it's more the inertia to change or the worry to change, I would probably advise rely heavily on consultants and vendors out there that can guide you through that deployment process.
That's great. And are you seeing things settle down in terms of the number of demand partners that you're seeing publishers work with? Because that certainly I know header bidding's sort of gradually maturing, but it always felt like there were almost too many being pulled in at any one time, as democratized as you want it to be. Are you seeing that starting to settle down within a specific range?
Yeah, it's a really, really great point. And the one thing I think around 2017, 18, supply became commoditized because most people had some form of header bidding in play, whether it was managed or deployed themselves. Most had 5, 6, 7 exchanges or different types of niche exchanges plugged into that. Some I've seen up to 12, 13 in some markets, which is, how many is too many? And you've got to also think of your business as you add more and more, the latency builds up. If you've got a client-side integration, you're really putting a lot of strain on that inventory to load and deliver results. We're seeing it actually strip back. Publishers are getting really smart now, and certainly as the knowledge gap is coming up, there are a lot of work that demand side, and Benji, who's on the panel a little bit later, I'd really love to hear from him in terms of SPO. It's driving this idea that not all paths to the supplier are equal, and that is a factor. Networks are having a harder time than ever. The major exchanges, certainly, publishers are plugging in 3, 4, 5 of the major exchanges, but do they need to keep going? How many is too many? We are seeing averages around, like I said, your 4 to 6 mark in a header bidding wrapper. Some of the more emerging markets, when I take myself out of Australia, New Zealand, and when I look at Indonesia or Thailand or some of those, they've certainly got 12 to 13, 14 in some cases. I think that will settle down. They're 12 months behind our adoption curve.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to become not necessarily how many more can I plug in, more what extra benefits besides just giving my supply to an exchange do I get? Am I getting consulting? Am I getting insights? Am I getting analytics? Things like this they'll actually separate out.
That's a great point to bring in now our wider panel. So please join us, everyone else. Thank you very much, Mitch, for that bit. And I just feel like we should have been providing more information on Prebid sooner than we have been, but there we go. So it's lovely to see you all. Thank you so much. And as we're talking about the handbook and the update, there's a couple of you on this call that are actually working on it. And one of them is yourself, Ben, from Interplay, who sits in our S&G Council. So do you have any updates that you can provide in terms of what we might see in the forthcoming version?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank Irene, who has been driving this from Magnite. Obviously, there's been contributions from Chris, Justin, our fellow panelists as well. I know key members of the actual council have also contributed. Essentially, the updates for the Auction Dynamics Handbook are around improving the content, turning it into a more cleaner guide. There's going to be some coverage on key auction dynamics concepts, rather than sort of deep diving into sort of advanced topics and issues. So if you're basically new to the industry or you want a refresher, you can just pick up the handbook quickly, flick through it rather than get bogged down by sort of like any potential issues and nuances. That's essentially what the tech vendors are there for. They will provide that expertise. But that's not to say that we're sort of like making it like, a dumbed down version. Obviously there's some advanced topics such as SPO, demand path optimization, that need obviously that comprehensive overview. But one thing that I do want to actually mention, and it'd be quite good to get some feedback from the participants on this webinar today, is that there has been talk of a wiki style directory. I hope I'm not caught in controversy by mentioning this.
No,
I believe it's actually a good idea to have a wiki resource that could be updated constantly, as opposed to waiting for a handbook that is like 12 months. We're waiting for sort of Auction Mechanics 2021, as opposed to having a sort of like wiki that could be actually continually updated. Because as Mitch just presented, 4.0's come out. There's going to be obviously additional changes coming up throughout the actual year. So it'd be good to sort of get some feedback on what our audience think of potentially building out a wiki style directory for this. So look, newest additions to the handbook: header bidding refresher, demand path optimization, supply path optimization as well. Additions to the auction dynamics sections. We've got a section on IAB transparency, ads.txt. And also we have a section that outlines how these are important to key businesses within the ad tech ecosystem. I've contributed something, hopefully it makes it in from a publisher perspective, but I know that our panelists are also working on what it means for an SSP, a DSP, etc., etc. So that's what you can expect to see.
Yeah, good stuff. And that's a good reminder for all the attendees to please input questions that you have for the panelists as we go through the various topics now, and also anything on Prebid. And we're certainly looking, now that we've launched a new website here in IB Australia, we've got a new website, so I think I just pulled my lead out, sorry. So we are looking to provide sections where you can more easily pull out specific guidelines and updated standards in an easier manner. And one of the key areas and one of the reasons for updating the handbook has been the pretty standardized shift now to first price as a default auction model, particularly for display. So how, Janette from Index, how are you seeing that sort of settle down now? How's that transition been over the last year or so? Oops, you're still on mute.
Yes, I am. So particularly around, the transition for first price auctions, I think that it's really, it's the only auction dynamic that allows for an auction to be transparent to buyers in the unified auction environment of today's programmatic ecosystem. And at Index, we're thrilled that the majority of the market has already made that shift, and buyers and publishers alike stand to benefit, as well as drive even more competition in the market. And I can only speak, from the Index perspective and comment on our approach, which was very steadily to move our partners to model and to communicate the change to DSPs as we ushered more and more publishers into the world of the first price auctions. We wanted to ensure that each of our partners were fully aware of the shifts taking place, which was a methodology we found very successful, given the benefits of the first price. And communication and education with the DSPs was crucial. And any kind of switch like this in a market needs to be accompanied by a fair amount of education, both on the buyer and the publisher side.
Yeah. Do you think it's been a little less bumpy than we're all anticipating prior?
I think that some buyers saw a few bumps.
Yeah, okay.
But it was such an amazing opportunity to delve in and to rebuild trust, particularly between buyers and exchanges who have historically never had a relationship, and now suddenly this thrust the need for that relationship to be formed and that trust to be rebuilt, because working with the connecting the buy and the sell side around auction mechanics and options, and helping buyers navigate this shift, and also helping them frame why this happened, and why, you know, a second price auction, which potentially never really ever existed, had to evolve into something that was fairer and more transparent. It was a joy to work with the buyers through this and to address their concerns and to help increase knowledge in that area. Yeah,
it definitely would have taken a lot more effort on their part. And Mitch, are you seeing that? I mean, that's in display. Are you seeing similar trends now across mobile and or video?
I'm going to say yes and no. Video, to an extent, yes. The adoption has been a lot easier due to its premium nature. So we are kind of seeing that is being accepted as a really good way to transact. With mobile, and particularly, there has been probably some resistance from mobile apps or networks. I think probably that's where it stems from. And I think Janette hit the nail on the head. Is certainly the biggest move with First Price is the transparency of First Price, is declaring you know, what that bid is and what the winning bid is, and certainly the margins that the tech tax takes throughout that supply process. And you're implementing this, you know, across an industry where there were potentially margins a lot larger being made in mobile ad networks that have been very, very, you know, lucrative for many, many years, right? So that's a really nice way to put it. But you know, I have had feedback from some mobile developers that actually just like staying in the traditional waterfall. They do not want to. They do not want to move forward. They do not want second price. Even they do not want first price. They want premium sold direct and their own ad server making decisions. And that reluctance is purely based on the way in which they're making their margins. So, you know, I think as the growing concern of supply pools start to be like, I really want to know what's happening within the supply stack. I really want to know that I have a transparent view of all of the tech tax. And Janette will certainly agree to this. You know, as an SSPs, many people are happy as long as we have the declared amount of our tech tax right in front of them. You know, then many of them are happy to bring on demand partners, and I'm sure much the same for Benji and David Benjafield's point of view from a demand side, as long as it's there in front of them and they can see it. So. Video, probably to, you know, sum up, yes, really due to its premium nature. Mobile, I think we certainly have a little bit more as an industry a way to go, purely based on those margins that are being made in between that, you know, in between that.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. Some of the webinars we've been looking at, as we've gone across some of the verticals, we dealt with a couple of publishers that actually still sell the majority of their inventory on share of voice, which feels like the good old days. Benji, one of the key areas that we worked on really hard for the last version of the handbook was actually trying to get into the detail to explain all the various aspects of the bidding tools, the different sort of deployment of various mechanical approaches for buyers, let's say, bid shading, etc. Is this something that still remains a key tactic for buyers?
Yeah, critical, absolutely critical. I think a lot of bid shading technologies should now be considered table stakes. I think if you're working with a buying technology that can't articulate how it works with bid shading, I would suggest maybe think about your buying partners. It is about transparency, as Janette was talking about, like really making sure that from the buy side, we have the transparency to make the correct decisions about incoming opportunities. Whether it's flagged as first price or not, whether it's a complete supply chain object, whether it's all of those signals that the demand side can really make intelligent decisions on, I think has become more and more critical as the landscape has evolved. We can only make the best decisions we can on the information we have. And I think one of the stance that we've taken as a company, at least, is to actually then decide and really evaluate and publicly stack rank our partners based on that transparency. So not kind of some abstract kind of like, this is a good partner, we prefer working with X or Y, but really kind of like spreadsheet, hard numbers. You know, this person scored a 3.3 out of a possible 3.3 on these kind of categories. And we make this information available to our clients. the more transparency, the more granularity we get in that relationship, the stronger we feel that we can buy against whatever the results are for the budget. So we tend to kind of think, and this is maybe the buy side talking a little bit, an advertiser's dollars don't exist to pay a publisher's revenue. And an advertiser's dollars exist to return value back to the advertiser. And so it's our diligence in this transparency to make sure that we're extracting the maximum value we can against that dollar in a trustful, responsible, transparent way that encourages that bi-directional flow of information.
And is that flow of information bi-directional? I mean, there's a good question actually that's come in terms of what's the insights and transparency and visibility from the SSPs up into the DSPs in terms of some of the moving parts.
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, from Index's perspective, we believe that transparency and accountability is essential, and it's essential to both the growth and the sustainability of our industry. So it's absolutely critical. But unfortunately, I think the meaning of transparency has recently been diluted, and the concept is really being used now as a company differentiator. And, I really don't support that case, because transparency should be table stakes. And although we've come a long way, I think in the last 3 years with the adoption of transparency standards, there's still a way to go. And ultimately, I think the next step is really accountability. And each player in the ecosystem needs to hold the other to uphold the same level of transparency across the board. And I think that there's still a need for more education and upskilling to do here in order, to understand how players contribute to transparency in the industry. And I know from the conversations I'm having, with the buy side, that there's certainly still a keen appetite on this exact topic. And during my partner conversations, I generally relay that if you're a publisher or a buyer and you request a receipt per programmatic transaction from your tech vendor, if they say they can't share that information with you, I would be asking why not. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that level of accountability, I mean, I love that, actually moving from one sort of one claim or one philosophical approach that we adhere to sort of ramping that up to the next level. And we are looking to do and work as the IAB here in Australia on a project which we will do a bit more on in Q1 next year around transparency, which I think everyone's involved in. And Mitch, from your perspective, just to check in with you on OpenX, I mean, I suppose that again, it's a critical mantra at the moment. What's your view on it?
It's the guys have really said some amazing points, and I kind of want to echo. From an exchange, we're sitting in the middle, and things like transparency hugely important for us, both from a supplier point of view when we're talking to our publishers and trying to monetize their inventory the best possible way. And I think the only way to do that is via trust. And as I mentioned before, supply's commoditized now. So what, Janette said it perfectly then, like, is trust our USP these days? It should just be on the table, right? It's so, that's a definite key from the supply side point of view. But now we're not only just getting the pressures certainly to be very transparent, which is a great thing. This is a good pressure that exchanges are feeling now from the supply. We're actually getting it for demand. And Benji mentioned SPO perfectly and grading. This is something that exchanges are seeing. Every major demand side platform and every major holding group, so publishers, certainly they're aware of it, exchanges are being asked, to answer these questions, and those then are being graded thereafter. And then the grading will then put forth into terms of future investment within that exchange, which is a great thing, because we're going to start to see the exchanges that really can't keep up with transparent measures and accountability will start to dwindle. And all that does is really facilitate and support the greater transparency across our industry. So I'm all for it. And as I said, from an exchange, it's a good pressure coming from the left and the right, supply and demand, which is great.
And we've made a lot. We put our flag down recently in terms of what we felt were call outs, particularly around the adoption of the standards, as well as some best practices. And I can tell you that what's being looked at now are similar requirements or standards on the buy side, which is interesting. It'll take a bit of time, but that's something you'll hear more about next quarter as well. That the Open RTB working group at TechLab are looking at that. But what's been interesting is seeing a solution like ads.txt, which came out to do one thing, and that's actually become a bedrock, a sort of foundational requirement for publishers, which is then built upon by all the other standards. And Ben, obviously, you know, Interplay, you publish a few of your own sites, you look after a number of partner sites, and the importance of sort of implementing and managing what is just a text file. And it's elegant and simple and everything else, but it does, you know, it does need to be looked after properly. How are you finding the management of these transparency initiatives at the coal face on the sell side?
Well, we as an organisation, we're a very early adopter of this initiative. I think we've set up the majority of our partners with it since 2017, which I believe is when it sort of officially came out. And it's quite an ingenious solution in its simplicity. You know, I think sometimes in this complex world of programmatic, we sort of like marvel at the sort of complex accomplishments that we've made, and yet this solution of a root directory TXT file has saved millions and millions of dollars for publishers from it being siphoned off by bad actors. So look, my point is to ensure that you have a list regularly kept up to date, and a good starting point for that is check your ads.txt setup in GAM, or if you're working with a partner, check it out in GAM, because that will actually tell you whether or not you have 100% of your resellers or direct sellers verified. And we have seen issues, there can be issues that can crop up from time to time, and I'll give you one example. Let's say a publisher is looking to actually redirect its own ADX supply from, say, a reseller supply. What can happen is, what they do is they basically go to a new supply, and they actually implement their direct ADX line item, for example, but they don't take out the old reseller ADX line item from the ads.txt file. And what can happen is it can cause issues with ADX not being able to determine which basically supplier they should be running through. And that can then come back to say, actually, you've not got this authorized. And if that's 90% of your inventory being filled, that can actually be a big problem. So just make sure you regularly keep that up to date. Good starting point, as I've mentioned, is to review that in GAM. Also, as well, with the tech vendors, look, the tech vendors that we work with are very, very diligent in this space in updating their records. If you're working with, say, a tech vendor that has multiple SSPs plugging in their supply, it's important to actually reach out and make sure that those files are up to date. But on a whole, it's a very ingenious and simple solution that, you know, has been one of those great initiatives, and it deserves all the praise.
And you can see that the example there, money's not flowing because it's not managed properly. And obviously there's app ads for in-app environments as well. There's a version for CTV coming out shortly. But as you say, please don't have like Sharon, the intern, who's doing some filing at a business, managing your ads.txt file. Please ensure that it's someone that actually.
I'll quickly jump in. Most certainly from OpenX's point of view, it's the first place we will look when certainly there are errors we see popping up, and I say that because we will not bid on inventory that is not ads.txt compliant or app ads.txt compliant. So you'll see 100,000 impressed requests and 0 bidding impressions. So again, Sharon from the front desk.
I've just
no offense to any Sharons maybe on the call. So
Derek.
That's a good point, because yes, your first process of troubleshooting as to why supply's not coming through should be. Is my ads.txt files up to date?
Yeah, make sure it's run by the right people. Now, the pressure and effort made on all things transparency, Janette, are we seeing as a result of the improvement in SPO as a result of this greater effort to have clean, transparent paths through the supply chain?
No, absolutely. First and foremost, it's important to remember that in programmatic, sometimes less is more. We've all touched on this in the amount of partners in the ecosystem, and particularly when it does come to tech partners, and the consolidation often leads to accelerated innovation itself. And ultimately, fewer pipes can economically push more value by taking less from the buyer or the advertiser. And SPO is a really powerful way for buyers to control their buying paths and strengthen their supply relationships. And the goal of SPO is for buyers to access the inventory that matters the most to them. and consolidate the buying paths that are cost efficient and transparent, so as to ultimately increase their buying power. And then successful SPO begins and ends with optionality, understanding how brands and advertisers can achieve their desired business outcomes by working with the right partners and the right pipes. And buyers want to maximize what they call their working media in relation to transaction fees. And I think it's this type of thinking and innovation in this very particular space around fees that is going to open buyers and advertisers up to better campaign outcomes and ultimately their return on ad spend. And I believe that in order to establish that more transparent, innovative digital environment, we have to start by clarifying the inner workings of the supply chain and costs there. And as I referenced before, the first thing I said was many buyers across the ecosystem are building and investing in relationships with SSPs and exchanges for the very first time ever. And as a result of that, they've begun to build a more trusting relationship with the programmatic players on the publisher side as well. And the capacity to build trust with these selected partners and to differentiate between the transparent and the non-transparent participants is one of many ways in which the supply path optimization strategy can help boost trust and transparency, and not only for the buyers, but for the ecosystem at large. And in this market in particular, I think the interest has absolutely increased with the level of education, resources, and awareness made in recent years.
Yeah, it's no longer a sort of niche topic. And I know when we certainly in terms of the handbook and the information provided, which actually initially submitted and updated by MediaMath, and Benji, we've had MediaMath on a couple of supply path optimization panels and the such at events. But can you talk us through DPO and its benefits now it's complementing SPO in evolving as an offering for buyers through DSPs?
Yeah, sure. I think to take a beat on what Jay said as well, I think efficiency is an important part of what we do, a really important part. I think where we're seeing our conversations evolve is much more focused on return rather than strictly efficiency. And we're now at a place where the tools are here and scalable and able to be done at an individual campaign and advertiser level to get this done. So I think the example we had was a multinational client that had a project called Project Axe, which is a great kind of, very visceral name to talk about, what technology partners they want to work with. Really successful, were able to improve their campaign results by effectively just turning on and off exchanges. The iterative version of that is Project Scalpel, which is, they're not. They are who they are. I think we used to think about resellers and indirect as universally bad because it changed the efficiency equation. I think where we're at now is very much focused on this ROI or this return conversation, saying that as long as indirect reseller is transparent about fee structure, transparent about the value they add, and that value comes back to something that is incremental and additive for the advertiser, we're okay with that. And that's kind of the real kind of maturation of our ability to do this quickly, easily, and at scale for individual campaign needs. This isn't something that we kind of do broad stroke anymore. We can be very specific and very detailed about how we get into, down to individual supply paths on individual domains for individual strategies and buying tactics. That's the granularity that we should be able to give our buyers, because ultimately being just focused on efficiency, nobody wins. We wind up trying to find the cheapest possible impressions at something that may be performative. Whereas if we can come back to our advertisers on return, I think we're in a much stronger position about the value our industry provides to and our technology provides to their business. Yeah,
and that also must take an extreme amount of analytical effort as well to be able to cut through and pick out the paths that are actually providing the value that you're seeking.
For sure. And I think to kind of continuously circle back to, I'm going to steal Jay's words again here, accountability, not just transparency with our partners. I think the way that we work from the demand side with all of the partners, on this call and a part of the IAB, to make sure that that bi-directional flow of information facilitates that. I think traditionally our exchange partners have had a really hard time understanding what's successful and what is return for an advertiser, because they see such a narrow part of the media window. They see one impression, hopefully a click, if that's an important part of the experience and the user engagement. And so definitely with some of our partners, we're working on real bi-directional flow. So making sure that they're aware of what, and I'm going to say the word acquisition, but whatever that kind of like ultimate event that the campaign is helping to influence, I think is really important that we're telling our supply partners that, and therefore our supply partners can come back and really kind of give us the best view of their landscape, and that virtuous cycle of reinforcing that through responsibly shared information between technology partners.
Yeah, great answer. Just to shift things slightly, I mean, we're up to 45 minutes. We're going to continue. I think it looks like the attendees are staying on, which is great. So just in terms of the current economic climate and what we're all seeing coming through the pipes, as it were, just to come to you first as a publisher or representing a wide range of publishers, Ben, are you seeing a bit of a shift recently, particularly this quarter? Because I'm hearing confidence around the traps.
Yes, to answer your question, we are seeing that increase, but I do want to put a caveat in because, and this is an understatement, we do find ourselves in unusual circumstances. 2020 has by no means been what we would identify as a normal year. And as predominantly a sports network, what we found ourselves this year, some key events were that the AFL and NRL final series have been obviously extended into October as opposed to usually ending in September, which would be the back end of Q3. We also found, no one could go to Flemington. So 100,000 people that would normally go to, the Melbourne Cup were not allowed to, or any of the Spring Carnival events for that matter. And also as well, it's important to note that obviously here in Melbourne, particularly, because we've just endured such a long lockdown, certain things have been shut. So what we actually can see, and this is basically on yield growth, just to give you an example, is we saw a significant jump in the hobbies, games and leisures verticals. And I think it's actually basically due to these circumstances. People were actually betting online. So obviously yield would actually be a lot higher than what it would be normally during this quarter. I mean, from Q3 to Q4, we saw a 78% increase in that particular vertical. And we saw increases again across the board. We saw increases in autos. We saw increases in apparel. And again, that could be down to the fact that many more people were ordering online. One thing that we saw, which was really pleasing to see, the Premier on his sort of the Victorian Premier on his sort of daily briefings mentioned this when he announced that the 25k ring of steel around Melbourne was going to be withdrawn, and we are doing a Tourism Victoria to encourage Melburnians to get out and travel throughout the state. What's actually pleasing to see is that both law and government activity in Q4, and this would be certainly around the pandemic, rose by 83%, and travel and tourism looks like it's on the up as well, 25% increase there on the back of that. But one of the biggest increases that we saw, which was just ridiculous, was an increase in sport and fitness, which as a sporting network, we saw over a 700% yield growth.
Really, right,
compared to Q3.
I think I need to download a fitness app, frankly. But
so that is quite extraordinary.
Are you just seeing spend in Q4? Are you also seeing what's coming through in Q1, or do you think there's a sense that the market might hold back a little bit and they're just getting the Q4 budgets out, and we'll see what happens in Q1? Or are you seeing confidence in 21 as well?
Yeah, I believe there's confidence in 21. One thing that I have noticed, and this might cause a little bit of controversy, but with my fellow panelists, is demand for programmatic guaranteed (PG). I know Google DV360 are looking at it for the automotive industry with high impact solutions, and with the fact that we've got Black Friday and Cyber Monday coming up, potential sponsorships around those with high impact skins, etc., from a PG perspective, I think could be very, very appealing, particularly if you've got those relationships with those clients. I know one client that we work with heavily in sport, they want to do PG deals because the direct IO route can actually cause legal issues. You know, there's time constraints about getting that type of approved. The programmatic budgets are already there; they're already ready to go. It just falls into the guaranteed bucket. So I'm actually expecting in 2021 that we will see probably more of a shift from direct IO to PG buying.
So Ben, you've now brought up PG amongst a panel of ad tech experts. So I'm expecting another hour. We've got another hour at least, and the Q&A is going to light up. But Mitch, are you seeing what are you seeing in terms of trends?
I'll talk quickly at a regional view. I will give my 2 cents to Ben.
I was expecting as much.
I think for executions where it makes complete sense, and I know Benji will support me on this one. You know, I think video executions or high impact display. Yes, we will see that continue. But because of the pressures of SPO, we are now getting more curated inventory than ever before, which is giving buyers so much more confidence. So from Benji or the DSPs, all the DSPs out there and the agencies that are out there, they are more confident now than ever to buy on a curated list or a PMP, where they still want the efficiencies of programmatic at scale, right? So I will say that I think there'll be an uptake in certainly PMPs or curated PMPs, whether that be multi-publisher-led category deals across, you know, a few exchanges or vice versa. And then PG, I think, will rise substantially in the places where it matters. You know, high impact display, difficult to execute kind of, you know, ad formats or video. Premium video. Generally speaking, kind of go back to the first question, is just the region itself, confidence is back substantially. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic still in many markets, and some are better than others. But I will say that, you know, in March and April, when you had the always on clients that just paused, they are really coming back, heading towards Christmas. We're seeing some great uptake from them, as well as your usual suspects. So your government, your health, your fitness, your e-commerce. We're seeing huge, you know, bursts as you would expect to see with people at home. But more generally speaking, as an exchange, we have seen a really big uptake in terms of demand heading towards Q4.
And the retailers running into Christmas, and all the expected seasonalities. And that's the region, is it? So you're seeing that across
completely across the region, all the typical highs and lows. You know, certainly there is still a dampener, and I don't want to say that we're kind of out of the hole yet. To anyone that's on the call. But, you know, 2020 is certainly one of the toughest years that you publishers will see. But it's not all doom and gloom, certainly across our region, particularly. We're recovering, I think, a lot quicker than EMEA or the US. So I will say that.
Yeah, it's been impossible to predict anything, but at least now you feel there's some positivity. Just to touch upon another aspect, whilst we still have time, Benji. So we're talking a lot here about the various aspects, utilization of header bidding, but what about within in-app environments? Are we seeing that becoming more popular, more predominant within sort of, say, particularly the exciting areas of CTV and APAC spend recently? Is that what are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to try to sneak in audio in here as well. We had the earlier what about audio inventory question.
That's good.
Really critical, like really critical, because we recognize that latency and user experience, particularly within the CTV/OTT space, is really important. Where we struggle against this, I guess, is because it is server side, and because we're seeing so much of that server side conversation against particularly OTT and CTV, that the measurement and the is this fraud or not question, based on the way that like our current partners work. So we work with White Ops. White Ops themselves say that, you know, a lot of this stuff that is totally genuine and totally valid exhibits a lot of the same technology signals that look like fraud. So it's a really hard one at this point just to double down and jump in on. We recognize that it's the future. We recognize that the overall, the cost benefit does come out on the benefit side, but we're waiting for some of that maturity of the measurement piece, of the quality, and making sure that we're doing the right thing by our buyers before we kind of really sort of say, this is where we're at and this is where we're going. It will happen, undoubtedly, and I think, you know, Mitch talked really well about the maturation of that mobile market, and I think over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, as we finally kind of say goodbye to the cookie, we'll be talking much more about, you know, cookieless identity as a critical pathway. So absolutely, I think the death of that third-party cookie will help against these kind of environments and the standardization of auction mechanics across those spaces.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, look out for we're doing a piece on fraud and CTV actually in the next couple of weeks, just to give insights into not just best practices but considerations and a viewpoint for broadcasters and tech vendors. And we wrote recently in ExchangeWire around sort of protecting the growth of CTV as it naturally, inevitably will democratize further. So Janette, I'm gonna give you a crystal ball now as the last point in terms of what you're seeing for 21 and what you'd particularly like to see the market, whether it's publishers or I know you work on the demand side. If there are any aspects of 21 that you think we should be looking out for.
Yeah, I think it's like Benji and I have some kind of a virtual wire connecting our brain. That was such a nice segue for me, Benji. But you know, one of the biggest topics this year has obviously been the demise of the third-party cookie and how its deprecation is going to impact us. You know, from Index's perspective, you know, this is super positive, but we really need to get to work, and publishers need to start looking at how the demise is going to impact them, you know, how much of their traffic is coming from cookies currently, what first-party assets they have access to, and which vendors they're wanting to engage with to build a strategy for this cookieless future. And, you know, the publishers also need to think about what works for them, but also what works for their users, and now experiment. And, you know, buyers should also be looking at what audiences they have access to and see which campaigns they can start activating on without the use of third-party cookies. And it always starts with that first campaign. So now's the time to test, to learn, because that evolution of the digital advertising future, it's well underway, and we're looking at a future that's new, it's improved, and it's one that we all know is going to be driven by these one-to-one relationships between the consumers, the publishers, the brands, the marketers, and of course the technology partners that make it all possible. But fundamentally, as an industry, you know, we cannot be late to this one, and we cannot afford to have this fall by the wayside until the very last minute, and then we all panic. You know, so I hope that this is a call to action for publishers that sticks, and that it remains atop of the priority list for publishers.
Absolutely, no, and it's collaborative effort, and seeing it as ultimately as an opportunity rather than a huge challenge. It's important. We will have a dedicated webinar on this on December the 10th, just so you know, which will include an update directly from the product leads around all things identity and data at Tech Lab in the States. So they'll be dialing in to provide an update, and we'll have a local panel for that. But look, for today and for now, thank you very much, panelists. Thank you all. There is one question outstanding around transparency again, but I'm going to say look out for the work and the outputs and the conversations in terms of what's described there as hidden fees, but in terms of pure transparency, in terms of where the inventory goes and where the money goes. That's something we're doing a lot on next quarter, and we don't have time to go into that now. But thank you very much to everyone for your time, and we do have another webinar next week. We are continuing the theme of digital AdOps in terms of what the Standards and Guidelines Council are pushing out, and we'll be focusing on the other popular topic, which we sort of label as careers, but it's increasingly more about your individual well-being if you're working in AdOps, tech ops, programmatic roles, particularly with the remote working, and what's been working well for the individuals, but what's been working well for teams, whether it's specific teams or ranges of teams, as they've been working together in this new manner, and in terms of what's best for businesses. And we'll try and look at the good, the bad, and some predictions for the future. We'll be doing that with some members from our council, but we'll also be doing that with Chris Beal, who's the CEO of Unlimited, who'll be coming on to give us an update in terms of what they're seeing around they survey the industry in terms of mental health particularly, and they've got some updates for us, and Chris will be joining us on the panel too. So look out for that. That's 11 o'clock next week, and I think Tiffany is sharing the link with you now. But thank you very much, everyone, today. Thanks for joining us, and thank you so much for the panelists. You were fantastic. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you, JJ.
Thank you, JJ. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, JJ.